Chapter 8. The Story of Iron John and the Moment One's Hair Turns to Gold. So what happens next in your story with Iron John the Wild Man?
Well, so far, as a young man, I stole the key from under my mother's pillow. I let the wild man out, and I rode upon his shoulders into the wilderness. Like Huck Finn, I started down the Mississippi on a raft with a companion from a different world. But since our story deals with initiation, we have to deal with some sort of wound, because that's a part of it. There are initiation experiences from all cultures across the world that mention two significant events. First is a clean break from the parents, when the young man goes into the woods, and this is the same thing that happened to the Buddha when he left the Father's kingdom. The second thing that happens is a wound that older men give the boy, which could be a scarring of the skin, a cut with a knife, brushing with nettles, or a tooth gets knocked out. But these injuries are not given sadistically. The initiators of young men make sure the wound is not about meaningless pain, but reverberate out of a rich center of meaning. In my story with Iron John, if you remember, I wounded my finger when I twisted the key to unlock the wild man and let him out. I squeezed my finger when the door opened and it started to bleed. So this wound hints at the wounds that each of us have received in our attempts to let the wild man out of the cage. Old men didn't give me a wound, but rather I did it myself. So whether it's an old man of the past scarring us with a seashell, or a tattoo, or we do it ourselves, the scar stands for a wound that is already there. The wounded finger in my story stands for a wound that most men might receive. So back to the story. When the wild man brought me into the forbidden forest once more, he took me down from his shoulders, placed me on the earth, and said, "You will never see your mother and father again. But I will keep you with me, for you have set me free, and I feel compassion for you. If you do everything as I tell you, all will go well. I have much gold and treasure, more than anyone else in the world." The wild man made me a bed of moss, and in the morning he took me to a sacred spring. And when I got to this pond, I looked at it, and it was as clear as crystal and full of light. Now the wild man spoke. "I want you to sit beside this sacred spring and make sure nothing falls in, because if that happens, it will wrong the spring. I'll return each evening to see if you've obeyed my order." And so I sat down at the spring's edge. Occasionally I caught a glimpse of a golden fish or a golden snake, and I was careful to make sure nothing fell into it. But as I sat there, my wounded finger was in so much pain, and since I hadn't attended to it yet, I dipped my finger in the water of the sacred spring. As soon as I pulled my finger out, I saw that my own finger had turned to gold, and no matter how much I washed it elsewhere, the washing did no good. Then Iron John came back that evening and said, "Anything happen with the spring today?" I held my golden finger behind my back and said, "Oh, not really, not much at all." "Ah, well, I see the glimmer as you've dipped your finger in the spring. We can let it pass this once, but don't let it happen again," said Iron John.
What does the golden finger mean? I asked.
It makes us wonder in our own lives. What wound do we have that hurts so much that we have to dip it into the water? Initiation for young men amounts to helping us remember a wound, and by that we mean the soul wounds or injuries to the emotional body. Sometimes the outward scars remind us of the inner scars. Often when we feel a wound, we take one of two roads. We can either take the grandiose road, and we climb up above the wound and shame. Perhaps we get good grades, Become the one in the family who is cheerful. Become a sort of doctor of our own suffering and take care of others. Something exceptional carries us away, and we can become cheerful and successful, but not very human. If we take the other road, the depressed road, we live inside the wound and the shame. We are actually closer to the wound than those on the grandiose path, but we are not necessarily more human. The victim is an imposing person too. The victim accepts the crown of victimhood, becoming a prince or princess in another way. And sometimes men without fathers take this road. Each of us takes both of these roads, though we might use one on Sundays and holidays and the other on weekdays. Some take a third road. It is the road of paralysis, robot behavior, seriously pursued numbness with a hollow center, no effect, no emotion upward or downward, which is an automatic life. So the idea of my injured finger stands for a variety of childhood wounds in all shapes, colors, and sizes, whatever a person's individual wound may be. So let's get back to the story. When we let the wild man out of the cage, who represents our own brilliance, bounty, wildness, greatness, and spontaneity, the wound arrives. This could be a man's idea of his ultimate dream, only to be shot down by his father. It's when you finally embrace the idea of who you truly feel you are, only to be looked at with scorn. The wound arises upon letting the wild man out. It is thought that few American men in the last decades get past the key under the mother's pillow, and some, after they let the wild man out, attend to their wound with a band-aid and take one of the two paths, either the grandiose path and become doctors, the Wall Street man, an engineer, or they might become a victimized, helpless child on the depressed path. Throughout our lives, we can ask ourselves, is there anyone out there or have heard of who possesses true greatness? It might be someone you've watched on a movie or heard in a song or story. If we find this person, we should leave with him or her. We need to understand that the wild man is not necessarily inside of us, but my story suggests that the wild man is actually a being who can exist and thrive for centuries outside of the human psyche. He can be compared on the human plane as a mentor who will continue to live and grow whether he takes us as a student or not. Between the two roads of maniac excitement and victim excitement, there is a mentor, which could be thought of as a male mother. Behind this person, a being of impersonal intensity stands, which is Iron John. And so as a young man, I investigated the experiences of this wound in the presence of this independent, timeless, initiatory being. Once anyone steals the key and climbs on the shoulders of the wild man, three things will change. The wound, rather than being regarded as bad luck, will start to be seen as a gift. Second, the sacred or secret water, whatever that is, will appear. And finally, the energy of the sun will somehow be carried into the man's body. Now at the sacred spring, which turns things into gold, myth tells us that if the sacred spring was ever to get polluted, then everything on earth would die. So this water is an important place. It is a traditional place for the wild man to carry on his brooding, and we know that Merlin brooded there during his madness. It is also a place where ordinary people go for inspiration, spiritual food, and wisdom, just like how travelers go to holy places to receive nourishment. Psychologically, this is the water of the soul life, but only for those who are ready to go near it. This is the entrance into a spiritual or sacred life. It means a willingness to be a fish in the holy water, to be fished for by Dionysus or one of the other fishermen, to bow the head and to take hints from one's own dreams, to live a secret life, praying in a closet, to be lowly, to eat grief as the fish gulps water and lives. It means being both fisherman and fish, not to be the wound, but to take hold of the wound. Being a fish is to be active, not with cars or footballs, but with the soul. Being brought to the sacred spring by a mentor means the end of enchantment. The sacred spring that the wild man brought us to does not itself heal the wound that leads to escape or ascension, but it gives strength to the part of us that wants to continue the effort to gain courage and to be human. When Iron John took me to the water, the energy of the sun was carried into my body. Gold symbolizes sun glory, royal power, self-generating radiance, freedom from decay, immortality, spiritual luminosity. And it is that gold that has come to my wounded finger. By arranging the surprise of the golden fingertip, the wild man acts as a spiritual guide and gives us a promise. The promise is a rediscovery of a gold that was always there. If we think of the Greco-Roman life in detail, we understand that the meaning of the gold will not wash away. The Romans believed that each human being had inside him or her an angel or demon, which came down through the family line and was the seed of the individual good fortune in that person. They called the seed, or spark, or lucky star, a genius when noticed in man, or the Juno when noticed in a woman. The Romans imagined the demon as a guide, halfway between human and divine, a messenger from the holy world, a kind of guardian angel, or a white shadow. We should notice that the gold appears on the very same finger that I dared to open the wild man's cage with, so my fate was bound by the same finger that had the courage to unlock his cage. The idea teaches us that when we are in the presence of either a mentor or the wild man, a hint will come to us as to where our genius lives. Sometimes in a love affair, the lovers make love with the wild man or the wild woman. And if we are those lovers, we may feel certain body cells turn to gold that we thought were made of lead. Lovers and saints feel their fingertips are golden, and they may sense freedom from ordinary limits for days or months. An artist feels a curious mood of intensity when he or she is working on an art object, a poem, a painting, or a sculpture. So we could say that the sacred pond is right there in the studio, and the artist becomes capable of thoughts and feelings much wider than he or she ever experiences in normal life. The finger holding the pen or the brush turns to gold and suddenly sees amazing images and realizes what we're very good at. The wild man here amounts to an invisible presence, the companionship of the ancestors and the great artists among the dead. A love poem or an ecstatic meditation poem is really an indigenous way to preserve memory of the moment when the fingertip turns gold. When the young runner crosses the finish line in the presence of their coach, the tips of their fingers or toes may turn gold. By dipping our wound into the sacred water, we get nourishment and the strength to go further in the process. Initiation, then, does not mean ascending above the wound, nor remaining numb inside of it, but the process lies in knowing how or when, in the presence of the mentor, to dip it in the water. This wound that hurts so much makes us involuntarily dip it into the water, and we have regarded this as a gift. You see, I would have never found my gift and genius if it had not been wounded. Those with no wounds are the unluckiest of all. But of course, I don't think an unwounded person has ever been found. Men are taught over and over when they are boys that the wound that hurts is shameful. A wound that stops you from continuing to play is a girlish wound. He who is truly a man keeps walking, dragging his guts behind. This teaching is diametrically opposite. It says that where a man's wound is, there his genius will be. Wherever the wound appears in our psyches, whether from an alcoholic father, shaming mother, shaming father, abusing mother, whether it stems from isolation, disability, anxiety, depression, or disease, that is precisely the place for which we give our major gift to the community. The Norwegian artist, Edvard Munch, clearly gave his immense gift out of his disabling anxiety. We feel such a gift-giving in Franz Kafka, Charles Dickens, and in Emily Dickinson. Now back to the story. Upon the second day at the sacred pond, I sat again at the spring, watching over it while Iron John went off. My finger still hurt, and after a while I ran my hands through my hair. But alas, one hair fell loose from my finger and fell into the sacred spring. I scooped it out with a golden finger, but the single hair turned to gold. Later in the day, when Iron John returned, he knew what had happened and said, "I see you've let a hair fall into the spring. I'll allow it this time, but if it happens a third time, it will dishonor the spring, and you will not be able to stay with me any longer." Hair may suggest not only a closeness to animals or a wild nature, but also suggests thoughts. Hair keeps coming out of our head day and night, so hair resembles thoughts that arise even when we are sleeping. Even when the conscious system is shut down at night, we have thoughts called dreams. Hair, then, stands for all those intuitions that appear out of nowhere, following channels we cannot observe. Hair is the abundance of perceptions, insights, thoughts, resentments, images, fantasies waiting and ready to come out whenever we are thinking of something else. When a human being takes an action, the soul takes an action. When hair enters the water, the soul adds gold to it. The sacred spring water is the soul itself, which does nothing if you do nothing. But if you light a fire, it chops wood. If you make a boat, it becomes the ocean. We could say up until now, I had learned the difference between secular space and ritual space. Ritual space gives something back to the man or woman who is prepared by discipline and is quiet, then enters it. Now in the story comes the third day. As I awoke, I sat up from the spring, and I was determined, no matter how much my finger hurt, not to let it move. Time passed slowly, and so I began gazing at the reflection of my own face in the water. I got the desire to look straight in my eyes, and in doing this, I leaned over further and further. Then all at once, all of my long hair fell down over my forehead and into the water. I threw my head back, but now all of my hair, every bit of it, had turned to gold, and it shone as if it were the sun itself. This made me really frightened, so I took out a handkerchief and covered my head so the wild man wouldn't know what had happened. But when Iron John came back, he knew immediately, and so he said, "Take that handkerchief off your head." Then my golden hair came tumbling down. This time, it wasn't the hands that reached out, but the eyes. The eyes began to search, maybe out of curiosity of the golden sacred pond, and I focused until I saw my face, then upon my eyes, which are the windows to the soul. Here the idea is that a person who gazes into a mirror receives an awareness of his other half, his shadow or hidden man. Awareness of that hidden man is a proper aim for all initiation. Looking within, we are in touch with our shadow, or the dark side, which could be called a spiritual twin. The Gnostics spoke a great deal about the twin, whom they imagined to have been separated from us at birth. The twin retains the spiritual knowledge given to us before birth. The twin, when he or she re-enters the psyche, insists on intensity and seriousness. When I looked down into the sacred pond, I saw the eyes looking back at me from nature. Here I realized that we are not only the source of ordered intelligence and conscious awareness. The Native American culture is full of stories that describe exactly the glimpse of such a personality. The human tribe and the buffalo tribe get connected through a buffalo chief,
he said. Or a holy white buffalo, which means that one can be both a buffalo and a god, I added.
We presume that the Native American hunters saw this being, part animal, part god, part human, with their inner eyes. So we could sum it up by saying that when a man has received a glimpse of his own psychic twin, and when he has seen the intelligence in nature, its consciousness or intent, then that man's hair turns to gold and he has a golden head,
said the white buffalo. But then why did you hide it?
I hid it under the handkerchief because I felt it was not proper to show it. Now 3 days had passed in ritual time in my story, and these 3 days could be years of our life. The initiator gave me a task, and I failed 3 times, but I received a gift anyway each time. The failures rose from the pain I felt from my human inability to keep attention, but the gift came from the waters with whom I established a relationship. So even though a lot of commotion has happened, we can guess that as a young man, I did all right. And so Iron John said to me, "You can't stay here any longer because you didn't make it through the trial. Go out into the world now, and there you will learn what poverty is. I see no evil in your heart. However, I wish you well, and so I'll give you this gift. Whenever you are in trouble, come to the edge of the forest and shout, 'Iron John! Iron John! Iron John!' Say this 3 times, and I'll come to the edge of the forest and help you. My power is great, much greater than you believe, and I have gold and silver in abundance."
Why do you have to shout it 3 times?
3 is an auspicious number. Great mysteries happen in threes. And now we've really seen something of how the wild man behaves in the 3 days by the spring. When we hear the phrase, wild man, our fantasies may think of him as a monster or a savage, but it is clear now that the wild man is closer to a meditation instructor than to a savage. He resembles a rabbi teaching the Kabbalah, or a holder of a mystery tradition, and in part, he resembles a hunting god. The wild man's job is to teach the young man how abundant, various, and many-sided his manhood is. The boy's body inherits physical abilities developed by long-dead ancestors, and his mind inherits spiritual and soul powers developed centuries ago. The job of the initiator, where the initiator is a man or woman, is to prove to the boy or girl that he or she is more than mere flesh and blood. The metaphors in the Iron John story refer to all human life, but are turned to the psyches of men. A young man is asked to descend into his own wound, to climb up into the realm of the twin, and to expand sideways into the consciousness that is in the trees, water, animals, and the 10,000 things. When a young man achieves these 3 realizations, or completed these 3 journeys, his hair turns to gold. That doesn't solve all his problems. On the contrary, it brings new ones, and that golden hair is going to be a problem,
said the white buffalo. Or will it be a blessing? And so the white buffalo winked.
You're catching on. It becomes whatever we think.